Speaking of climate change, Jennifer Marohasy is an Australian biologist, columnist and blogger. She is a senior fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs and was a director of the Australian Environment Foundation. She holds a PhD in biology from the University of Queensland, and she is the editor of this new book, Climate Change, The Facts 2020. Jennifer joins us now from Queensland. How are you, Jennifer?
Yeah, good. Lovely to be with you, Rowan. But I must say the contributors to the book don't agree with the fellow you were just quoting. They can't see catastrophe, they see cycles. They can't see anything unusual about the current rate or magnitude of climate change.
Fantastic. So tell us about the book. There was a Climate Change, The Facts in 2017, also by the IPA. This is a brand new book, brand new articles, some of the same contributors. But tell us about the basic thrust of the book and the three sections of it.
So there's three sections. There's a section on polar regions. So it starts off with a chapter about polar bears and how numbers are increasing. There's a chapter about sea ice trends. There's a chapter about wrestling penguins and how actually in tagging penguins at a particular location, the penguins got a bit scared and moved on, and so the researchers concluded as numbers dwindled that there was climate change, when in actual fact there was just migration. So that Section 1 about the polar regions. Section 2 is for people who like the technical. It's by atmospheric physicists and it talks about clouds. It's a really important section, but as I said, technical, and talks about how energy, including energy held by greenhouse gases, can move within the atmosphere, including through thunderstorms to the top of the atmosphere where it can be released to space. Third sections for those who like politics, so perhaps more of the listeners of this program, very much using different examples, but explaining how our institutions are failing us and how they are ideologically driven and how much they ignore the evidence, the facts.
Rita.
So, you know...
Sorry, Jennifer. Rita?
I was just going to ask, this book sounds ideal material for students. What are the chances it would end up in Australian schools?
Well, certainly the chapters on penguins and polar bears, I think kids 14, 15, 16, 17 will love it. And I guess something really important for children is to think about how you follow the evidence. You know, how do you distinguish fact from propaganda? And I think it is about fearlessly pursuing the facts. And that's what each of the authors in this book do. They go after, they research each topic until they feel that they've actually got to the truth of the matter. And that is something that can be taught, but it needs to start with somebody who wants to know what the facts are with respect to climate change, and somebody who's got an open mind. I love the Einstein quote, "Look deep into nature and you will understand everything better." And in the introduction, the book's got quite a long introduction, I quote from Thomas Huxley and how he says you need to put aside your preconceptions and just go with the evidence. And I think that's something that really needs to be taught in schools. It's the basis of skeptical thinking. It's the basis of science. It's so important.
James.
And kids love it. They get it.
They do. James.
And these facts, they are really, really important, Jennifer. And one of the things I want to ask about is some of the issues that we hear about a lot, notably bushfires. We keep getting told over and over again that the continent is getting drier and therefore our bushfires are getting worse. We even had Andrew Johnson of the Bureau of Meteorology testifying that the country was getting drier. But you went back and you looked at the actual data. What did you find, and what can this book tell us about the connection between climate and bushfires, and whether or not this is something new or something that we have seen before and we've been there before?
So chapter 16 of the book in the third section is about bushfires. And I look at the history of bushfires in Australia from 1851. And I talk about notions of wilderness, because the first Australians, they recognised that landscapes are dynamic and they actively managed regions, often to keep them open. So a lot of Northern Australia, when Whitefellow arrived, was open woodland. And what's actually happened with fire suppression is you may end up with more trees and more undergrowth, but that may not result in something that's more biodiverse. So I think we really need to think clearly about what are our objectives with respect to landscape. What are different philosophies in terms of landscape management? And then, yes, we must come back to the facts and the evidence. And that's where Andrew Johnson gets it all wrong. He talks about, and I think probably that Schwab fellow that Rowan was talking about earlier, they all talk about how Australia's got declining rainfall. It's just like something they all say. But you only have to go to the statistics held by the Bureau of Meteorology, by Andrew Johnson's own office. Whichever way you look at the data back over the last 100 years, it's not getting drier. It's actually getting wetter. And you can say to me, oh, well, maybe not the whole of Australia, but at least the southeast where we had the bad bushfires, that must be getting drier. But look at the statistics for the southeast region and look at, say, summer. And we've had our wettest summers in recent years. 2010, that was an extraordinarily wet summer, considering the rainfall record back to 1900. So, it's not that it's getting drier, it's not that it's getting hotter, it's that we've changed how we manage the landscape. And if we want, if we don't want to see such bad fires in eucalyptus forests into the future, then there has to be more money for hazard reduction, and there has to be more thought about what sort of forests we want in particular areas given the climate and the soil type.
Now, Jennifer, one other area, we've just about run out of time, but the iris effect. Increasingly, people are looking at the science of clouds in explaining climate variations. Tell us briefly your thoughts on that.
So they're looking in this book. So section 2 is by three atmospheric physicists and a chemist. One of them is Richard Lindzen, and he explains how, yes, with increasing atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide, it can get hotter. But he actually shows with the evidence, and this was all published 20 years ago, how there's compensatory mechanisms, how with more greenhouse gases, you end up with less cirrus cloud cover. And so you're not getting runaway global warming. There are negative feedbacks. And I love how the 3 chapters by the atmospheric physicists fit so neatly together and sort of point us in the direction of a new theory of climate, which I think we must move towards, because the history of science would suggest that you never actually disprove your current paradigm, even though it may have failed, until you actually can articulate and embrace a new theory of climate. And this new theory of climate probably is not going to have much of a role, if any role, for carbon dioxide. Certainly Danish physicist Henrik Svensmark from their Space Institute, who writes in section 2, he has no role for carbon dioxide in his theory of climate. He talks about clouds, he talks about the sun, he talks about cosmic rays. It's all in, that's chapter 12, I think.
Fantastic. Jennifer Marohasy, I urge people to rush out and buy Climate Change, the Facts 2020. You can get it at ipa.org.au.